The cantina on Nexus Prime buzzed with noise and activity. Smoke from different alien species mixed in the air, creating a thick cloud that hung over the crowded tables. The space station served as neutral ground where many different races came to drink, trade stories, and make deals. Tonight, like most nights, young soldiers filled the tables near the back wall. Zextal sat alone in the corner, his 4 eyes watching the crowd. His gray skin showed many scars from old battles. The Korthani veteran had served in more wars than most of these younglings had seen years of life. His mandibles clicked slowly as he sipped his drink, a bitter liquid that helped him forget the pain in his damaged left arm. At the table closest to him, 5 Valerian cadets laughed loudly. Their blue skin gleamed under the cantina lights, and their natural armor plates made soft clicking sounds when they moved. The tallest one, who seemed to be their leader, slammed his fist on the table. "I heard we get to fight humans next rotation," the tall Valerian said. His voice carried excitement. Finally, some easy targets after all that training. His friends laughed and nodded. Another cadet, smaller but with more scars on his armor, leaned forward. "My instructor said humans are soft. No natural weapons, no armor, no claws. They just have tools and machines. Primitive mammals," the tall one agreed. "I bet one of us could take on 10 humans without breaking a sweat." A third cadet joined in. "My cousin fought in the Outer Rim campaigns. He said the humans barely know how to use their weapons properly. They panic when they see real warriors." Zextal's mandibles stopped clicking. His grip tightened on his drink glass. The memories he tried so hard to bury started rising to the surface like bubbles in swamp gas. The sounds of the cantina seemed to fade away as images flashed through his mind. Ships burning in space. The screams of his soldiers. The cold, determined faces of human warriors who should have been afraid but never showed fear. The Valerian cadets continued their boasting. "I heard their ships are slow and weak," one said. "Made from cheap metal that breaks apart when you hit it hard enough." "Their ground troops are even worse," another added. "They run away when things get tough. No honor in combat." Zextal stood up slowly. His chair scraped against the metal floor, making a harsh sound that cut through the noise. Several nearby tables turned to look at him. The old warrior's reputation was known throughout this part of the galaxy. He had commanded fleets and led ground forces in conflicts that shaped the current peace treaties. The Valerian cadets noticed him approaching their table. The tall one looked up with curiosity rather than respect.
"Can we help you, old-timer?"
Zextal's 4 eyes focused on each of the young soldiers in turn. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible experience. "You talk about humans like you know them." "We know enough," the tall Valerian replied. "Soft, weak, cowardly mammals who got lucky with some technology." "Lucky?" Zextal repeated the word slowly. "Is that what you think happened at Kepler 442? The cantina grew quieter. Other veterans at nearby tables recognized the name of that battle. Some turned their chairs to listen. Others simply stared into their drinks, remembering friends who never came home from that system. "Kepler 442 was 3 years ago," the small Valerian said. "Before we joined the military." "What happened there?" Zextal pulled an empty chair from a nearby table and sat down heavily. His damaged arm hung at his side, useless since that battle. "I commanded the 3rd Fleet in that system. 500 ships under my direct control. The pride of the Korthani Empire." The young Valerians looked at each other. They had heard stories about the 3rd Fleet. It was supposed to be the most powerful naval force in Coalition space. But it had disappeared 3 years ago. Official reports said it was destroyed in a mining accident. "The Coalition sent us to deal with a human problem," Zextal continued. 12 ships. That was their entire fleet in the system. Command told us it would be target practice for our gunners. He paused to take another sip of his drink. The bitter liquid burned his throat, but not as much as the memories burned his mind. "I laughed when I saw their ships on the scanners. Old, patched together, some of them converted civilian vessels. I thought it would be over in minutes." More tables in the cantina had gone quiet now. Word was spreading that Zextal was telling a war story. Veterans and civilians alike strained to hear his words. The old Korthani warrior rarely spoke about his experiences. "Their leader sent us a message," Zextal said. "Admiral Jake Morrison. Human male, maybe 40 of their years. He should have been begging for mercy or offering surrender terms." The tall Valerian leaned forward. "What did he say?" Zextal's mandibles began clicking again, faster this time. He said, "Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are in violation of human space. Leave now or face the consequences." The Valerian cadets laughed. "That's it? A threat from 12 ships against 500? I thought the same thing," Zextal admitted. "I ordered my communications officer to demand their surrender. Standard procedure for dealing with inferior forces." He fell silent for a moment, staring at something only he could see. The cantina waited for him to continue. Morrison's response was 2 words. Zextal finally said, "Come and take it." The old warrior's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I should have listened to the tone of his voice. I should have paid attention to the way his crew looked at their stations. Calm, ready, not afraid, just ready. "Ready for what?" one of the Valerians asked. Zextal turned all 4 eyes on the young soldier. Ready to die for something they believed in. Ready to show the galaxy what humans do when you threaten their homes. The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. Zextal stood up slowly, his damaged arm hanging limp at his side. "You want to know about humans," he said to the Valerian cadets. "You want to understand what makes them dangerous. It is not their technology or their numbers or their weapons." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the young soldiers. "It is their absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when facing impossible odds, even when dying would be easier than fighting." As Zextal walked toward the exit, the cantina remained silent. The Valerian cadets stared at their drinks, no longer laughing about easy targets. Around them, other veterans nodded slowly, remembering their own encounters with human determination. The old warrior's footsteps echoed in the quiet space as he left, behind a room full of soldiers who were beginning to understand that some enemies are more dangerous than others. The next evening, Zextal returned to the same cantina. Word had spread about his story, and more soldiers waited for him. Veterans from different species sat at tables near his usual corner spot. The Valerian cadets from the night before had returned too, but their cocky attitudes were gone. Zextal ordered his usual bitter drink and sat down slowly. His damaged arm still caused him pain when the weather changed, and tonight the space station's climate control was acting up. He could feel the eyes of dozens of soldiers watching him, waiting for him to continue his tale. "You want to know how it started?" he said without looking up from his glass. "First contact with humans happened 4 years ago. Not 3 years ago at Kepler 442. That battle was just where everything went wrong for us." The cantina settled into quiet attention. Zextal took a sip of his drink and began to speak. The Coalition detected human radio signals from a system they called SOL, primitive electromagnetic transmissions, the kind young species use before they develop proper communication technology. The Science Council studied their broadcast for 6 months. A young Arthani soldier raised her hand.
What did they learn?
"That humans were violent, divided, and technologically backward," Zextal replied. "Perfect candidates for pacification and integration into the Coalition as a worker species. Standard procedure for primitive worlds." He paused, remembering the briefing documents he had read before the mission. The humans seemed like any other young species, aggressive among themselves but lacking the unity or technology to resist galactic civilization. Admiral Threx commanded the pacification fleet. 200 ships, including my 3rd fleet, as backup. We expected to be home within a month with a new member species for the Coalition. The old warrior's mandibles clicked slowly. Threx was confident. Too confident. He sent a single ship ahead to make contact and demand surrender. The ship returned with a recording of the human response. Zextal fell silent for a moment, lost in memory. The recording had been played during their final briefing, and every officer in the fleet had laughed at the human audacity. The human leader called herself Captain Lisa Hayes. Female, young for a ship commander by human standards. When our messenger ship demanded Earth's surrender to Coalition authority, she activated a visual communication link. He looked up at the waiting faces around him. Captain Hayes was standing on the bridge of her ship. The vessel was old, clearly built from whatever materials they could find. Her crew looked nervous but determined, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "What did she say?" the tall Valerian from the previous night asked. She said, "This is Captain Hayes of the UES Defiance. I speak for the people of Earth. We reject your demands for surrender. If you want our world, you will have to take it from our cold, dead hands." Several aliens in the cantina shifted uncomfortably. Such defiance from a primitive species was unusual. Most worlds surrendered when they saw the size of a coalition fleet. Admiral Threx found this amusing. Zextal continued. He ordered the fleet to Sol System. Full formation, all weapons powered, maximum intimidation display. We jumped into their space expecting to see their ships fleeing in panic. The veteran took another drink before continuing. Instead, we found 12 human ships waiting for us in formation. Not hiding, not running, just waiting. Their ships looked like they were built in shipyards by people who had never seen proper starship design. Only 12 ships against 200, an Arthani engineer asked. 12, Zextal confirmed. But they were arranged in a defensive formation around their home world. Every ship was broadcasting the same message on all frequencies. Captain Hayes speaking for all of them. He closed his 4 eyes, remembering that moment when everything began to go wrong. She said, "Coalition forces, you are not welcome in our system. Leave now and no harm will come to you. Stay, and we will defend our home with everything we have." The cantina remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Admiral Threx responded by ordering a demonstration of power. One of our heavy cruisers fired a warning shot across the bow of the lead human ship. Standard intimidation tactic. Zextal's voice grew quieter. The humans fired back. Not a warning shot. Full power weapons aimed directly at our cruiser. Their primitive kinetic rounds barely scratched our shields, but the intent was clear. They attacked first? A young Korthani soldier asked. They defended first, Zextal corrected. There is a difference. Admiral Threx saw it as an act of war. He ordered the fleet to engage and destroy all human vessels. The old warrior's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. That was when we learned our first lesson about humans. They do not fight like civilized species. He stood up and walked to the center of the cantina, addressing the entire room. Civilized warfare has rules. You target military vessels first, avoid civilian casualties when possible, accept surrender when offered. Civilized species understand when they are outmatched and choose to live rather than die pointlessly. Zextal turned to face the Valerian cadets. Humans do not follow these rules. When Captain Hayes saw our fleet advancing, she did not retreat. She did not try to negotiate. She ordered her ships to attack. Suicide, the tall Valerian whispered. That is what we thought, Zextal agreed. 12 ships against 200. It should have been over in minutes. But humans fight differently than any species we had encountered. He returned to his seat, his voice taking on a tone of reluctant admiration. Captain Hayes rammed her ship into Admiral Threx's flagship. Full speed, no hesitation. She overloaded her reactor just before impact. The cantina erupted in shocked murmurs. Ramming attacks were considered desperate and dishonorable by most galactic species. The explosion destroyed both ships instantly. Zextal continued. Admiral Threx, his entire command staff, and Captain Hayes died in that moment. But before she died, Hayes transmitted a message to every ship in both fleets. What message? Someone called out. Zextal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She said, "This is what happens when you threaten our home. Every one of us will die before we let you take Earth." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. A species willing to use suicide attacks against superior forces was dangerous in ways that traditional military doctrine did not address. The other human captains followed her example, Zextal said. Not ramming attacks, but the same complete commitment to victory or death. They used their ships as weapons, their crews as ammunition. No retreat, no surrender, no quarter asked or given. He finished his drink in one gulp. By the end of that first battle, we had destroyed all 12 human ships, but they had taken 47 coalition vessels with them, including our flagship and most of the command structure. 47 ships? The Arthani engineer asked in disbelief. 47, Zextal confirmed. And that was just the beginning. Earth started building more ships immediately. Crude, ugly vessels that looked like they were assembled from scrap metal, but every human crew fought with the same determination as Captain Hayes. The old warrior stood to leave. We thought we were dealing with a primitive species that would surrender after one defeat. Instead, we had started a war with people who considered death an acceptable alternative to slavery. As he walked toward the exit, Zextal called back to the room. That was our first lesson about human warfare. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to win wars no matter how many battles they have to lose first. The cantina remained silent long after he left. On the third night, the cantina was packed. Word about Zextal's stories had spread throughout Nexus Prime. Veterans, Active soldiers and even some civilians crowded into every available space. The old Korthani warrior found his usual table surrounded by dozens of eager listeners. Zextal sat down heavily, his 4 eyes scanning the crowd. The attention made him uncomfortable, but these young soldiers needed to understand what they might face if they ever encountered humans in combat. Too many good warriors had died because they underestimated Earth's defenders. After the first battle, he began without preamble. The coalition assumed the war would end quickly. Earth had lost their entire fleet, and we controlled orbital space around their planet. Standard procedure was to demand surrender and begin occupation operations. A Centauri officer near the front spoke up. But they did not surrender. No, Zextal replied. They sent a message to our temporary fleet commander, a human female named General Amy Carter. She appeared on screen wearing a simple military uniform, standing in what looked like an underground command center. The veteran paused to order his drink, giving the crowd time to settle. General Carter said, "Coalition forces, you have won the first battle. Congratulations, now the real war begins." Murmurs rippled through the cantina. Most species would have been seeking terms for surrender after losing their entire space fleet. She was not bluffing. Zextal continued. Within days, human ships began appearing throughout the system. Not well-built vessels like their first fleet, but converted civilian craft, mining ships, cargo haulers, anything that could mount weapons and carry a crew. Where did they come from? Asked the tall Valyrian who had become a regular listener. Earth's asteroid mining operations, Zextal explained. Humans had spread throughout their solar system much more than our intelligence indicated. Hidden bases on moons, mining platforms in asteroid fields, research stations in the outer planets. He took a sip of his bitter drink. But it was not the ships that taught us about human warfare. It was what happened when we tried to land ground forces. The cantina grew quiet with anticipation. Space battles were one thing, but ground combat was where most species proved their true warrior spirit. I led the assault on Titan 7, a mining colony in their outer system, Zextal said. Intelligence reports indicated 3,000 civilian miners with minimal defensive weapons. Easy target for my 10,000 soldiers. His mandibles began their slow clicking pattern. Colonel Ryan Brooks commanded the human defenders, male, middle-aged veteran of their internal conflicts. When our dropships landed, he sent a single transmission. What did he say? "Welcome to hell," Zextal replied simply. Then the real fighting began. The old warrior stood and began walking around the cantina as he spoke, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Human ground combat is unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. They do not fight for territory or tactical advantage. They fight to make you pay such a high price for victory that you question whether it was worth it. Surely, your superior numbers and equipment gave you an advantage, a young Arthani, suggested. Zextal's 4 eyes focused on her. Numbers and equipment help in conventional warfare. But humans do not fight conventionally. Colonel Brooks divided his miners into small groups and scattered them throughout the mining complex. No clear target for our heavy weapons, no central command to destroy. He paused at a table of nervous-looking recruits. We controlled the surface within hours, but the humans had retreated into the mining tunnels. Kilometers of narrow passages, multiple levels, countless side chambers, perfect terrain for defensive fighting. You could have used area weapons to clear the tunnels, the Centauri officer suggested. We tried, Zextal admitted, but the humans had prepared for that. They collapsed sections of tunnel behind them as they retreated, forcing us to advance single file through passages barely wide enough for our soldiers. The veteran's voice grew darker, and they fought for every meter. Explosive traps, improvised weapons, ambush attacks from hidden positions. My soldiers would clear a tunnel section only to have humans appear behind them from passages we thought were sealed. He returned to his seat, the memories clearly painful. The fighting continued for 6 days. We lost 400 soldiers taking the mining complex. When we finally cornered Colonel Brooks and his remaining miners in the main excavation chamber, we expected them to surrender. Did they? Someone called out. Zextal's mandibles stopped clicking. Colonel Brooks stood on a platform overlooking the excavation pit. 50 human miners surrounded him, all wounded, all exhausted, but none showing fear. He looked directly at me and said, "You want this place? You can have it." The cantina held its breath. Then he activated explosive charges they had placed throughout the mining complex. Zextal said quietly, The entire facility collapsed. Colonel Brooks, his miners, and 3,000 of my soldiers died when the tunnels caved in. Shocked silence filled the room. The Valerian cadets looked at each other with wide eyes, finally beginning to understand what they might face. But that was not the worst part. Zextal continued. As the complex collapsed, Colonel Brooks transmitted a final message to all human forces in the system. He said, "This is how we fight. This is what it costs to take our homes. Remember that when you face them again." He killed his own people just to kill yours, an Arthani engineer said in disbelief. He killed his own people to send a message. Zextal corrected. That humans would rather die than be conquered. That every victory against them would cost more than any reasonable commander would pay. The old warrior finished his drink. After Titan 7, human resistance throughout the system increased. Every mining station, every research base, every hidden outpost fought the same way. Total commitment, no surrender, maximum casualties for both sides. How long did the ground campaign last? The tall Valerian asked. 2 months, Zextal replied. 2 months to secure positions that should have taken days. We lost 15,000 soldiers conquering facilities that housed maybe 5,000 humans total. He stood to leave, then turned back to address the room. But the worst lesson we learned was yet to come. While we were fighting for every tunnel and chamber, the humans were studying us, learning our tactics, our equipment, our weaknesses. Learning for what? Zextal's 4 eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect. Learning how to build weapons that could kill us more efficiently. By the time we realized they were adapting to our technology, it was too late. Too late for what? The Centauri officer asked. Too late to prevent them from becoming the most dangerous enemy the Coalition had ever faced, Zextal said, as he walked toward the exit. Tomorrow I will tell you about their adaptability. How humans took our weapons and made them better. How they turned our own technology against us in ways we never imagined possible. The cantina remained silent as the old warrior left, each listener contemplating a species that viewed total war as an acceptable response to invasion. The fourth night brought an even larger crowd to the cantina. Officers from multiple coalition species had arrived specifically to hear Zextal's account of the human war. The old Corthani veteran noticed several high-ranking officials in the back of the room, their presence making him nervous. Zextal took his usual seat but remained standing, addressing the packed room directly. You want to understand how humans became so dangerous? Tonight I tell you about their greatest weakness, which became their greatest strength. The cantina fell silent, every ear straining to catch his words. Humans adapt, he said simply, not just to new environments or situations, but to their enemies. They study everything, learn from every encounter, and improve constantly. What they lack in natural advantages, they make up for with intelligence and creativity. A senior coalition admiral in the back called out, surely their primitive technology limited their effectiveness. Zextal's 4 eyes found the admiral in the crowd. That is what we thought. After the ground campaigns, we captured several human weapons and equipment samples. Our scientists studied them and concluded that human technology was at least 50 years behind coalition standards. Then how did they remain effective? The admiral pressed. Because they did not stay primitive, Zextal replied. Commander Steve Parker was captured during a raid on an asteroid base. Instead of interrogating him for information, we should have kept him away from our technology. 3 days in our detention facility, and he had figured out how our gravity generators worked. The old warrior began pacing around the room as he spoke. Parker escaped by overloading our ship's gravity system, creating a localized black hole that destroyed the entire vessel. But before he died, he transmitted the technical specifications to other human forces. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Creating artificial gravity wells required advanced understanding of physics that primitive species should not possess. Within weeks, human ships were mounting improvised gravity weapons, Zextal continued, crude devices built from captured coalition technology and mining equipment. They should not have worked. Our engineers said the designs violated basic safety principles. But they did work, the Centauri officer observed. They worked, Zextal confirmed. Captain Kelly Anderson used one to destroy an entire coalition supply convoy. Her converted cargo ship generated a gravity pulse that cracked the hulls of 6 military vessels simultaneously. The veteran stopped pacing and faced the crowd directly. But it was not just weapons they adapted. Everything we did, They found ways to counter. Our jamming systems? They developed new communication methods using quantum entanglement. Our advanced sensors? They built stealth technology from materials we had never considered useful. How is such rapid adaptation possible? Asked a Thriss scientist near the front. Zextal's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Humans do not innovate like other species. Most races develop technology slowly, following established principles and testing extensively before implementation. Humans experiment constantly, take enormous risks, and accept frequent failures as part of learning. He returned to his seat, his damaged arm causing visible pain. Dr. Patricia Wells led their research division. Female, brilliant, completely insane by galactic standards, she authorized weapons tests that should have killed her entire team. What kind of tests? Someone called out. Experiments with antimatter containment using magnetic fields generated by their primitive fusion reactors, Zextal said. Attempts to weaponize quantum uncertainty principles. Research into using artificial gravity to compress matter beyond critical density. The crowd grew nervous. Such experiments were banned by coalition safety protocols. Most of their tests failed catastrophically. The veteran continued, but the ones that succeeded gave them weapons we could not counter. And they shared all their knowledge instantly across their entire species. Shared how? The coalition admiral asked. Their computer networks, Zextal explained. Every human base, ship, and research facility was connected through faster-than-light communication systems. When Dr. Wells discovered a new weapon design, every human engineer had access to the plans within hours. The old warrior paused to order another drink. This is what made them so dangerous in the later stages of the war. We would develop countermeasures for their weapons, only to find they had already moved on to completely different technology. When did you realize the war was unwinnable? The tall Valerian asked. Zextal's four eyes grew distant. At the Battle of Kepler 442. My fleet had been reinforced to 500 ships. We outnumbered the humans 50-1. Admiral Jake Morrison commanded their defense force. 12 vessels, most of them converted civilian craft. The cantina leaned forward in anticipation. This was the battle that had destroyed the legendary Third Fleet. Morrison did something unprecedented. Zextal continued. He broadcast his battle plan to every ship in his fleet, including the expected casualty projections. 90% probability of total loss. Then he asked for volunteers. Did anyone refuse? The Arthani engineer asked. No one, Zextal said quietly. Every human captain voted to proceed. They knew they were going to die, and they chose to fight anyway. The veteran's voice grew stronger as he relived the memory. Morrison split his tiny fleet into 3 groups. Captain Ben Foster took 4 ships on what appeared to be a suicide run around the system's gas giant. Captain Rachel Murphy led 3 converted freighters in a direct assault on our main formation. And Morrison himself, he kept 5 ships in reserve, including his flagship UES Liberty, Zextal replied. An ancient vessel held together with spare parts and determination. The old warrior stood again, his voice carrying the weight of bitter experience. We should have destroyed them easily. 50 ships for every one of theirs. Superior technology, better training. But humans do not fight like rational beings. What happened? The coalition admiral demanded. Zextal's mandibles clicked rapidly. Murphy's freighters used their cargo holds to deploy thousands of improvised missiles and attack drones. Cheap expendable weapons that overwhelmed our point defense systems through sheer numbers. He paused, remembering the chaos of that battle. Foster's flanking force disappeared around the gas giant, using gravitational acceleration to build incredible speed. We assumed they were fleeing. They were not fleeing, the Centauri officer said. No, Zextal confirmed. They used the planet's gravity to slingshot back toward our fleet at velocities that turned their ships into kinetic weapons. Foster himself rammed our command carrier, destroying both vessels instantly. The cantina held its breath as Zextal continued. Morrison waited until our formation was disrupted, then led his reserve force straight through the center of our fleet. The UES Liberty was falling apart around him, atmosphere venting from dozens of hull breaches. Why did he not retreat? Someone asked. Zextal's voice grew quiet with something that sounded like respect, because his ship still had weapons and there were still targets to destroy. Morrison kept firing until his reactor overloaded, taking 3 more coalition vessels with him. The veteran sat down heavily. When the battle ended, we had lost 347 ships. The humans lost all 12 vessels, but they had proven something important. What? that they could not be conquered through conventional warfare, Zextal said. Every victory against them cost more than any reasonable commander would pay. Every defeat made them stronger, more determined, more dangerous. He finished his drink in one gulp. After Kepler 442, the Coalition High Command began discussing peace negotiations. Not because we could not defeat the humans, but because the cost of victory was becoming unbearable. How did the war end? The tall Valyrian asked. Zextal stood to leave. Tomorrow night I will tell you about the peace negotiations, about what we learned when the fighting stopped, about the weapons humans chose not to use and why that terrified us more than anything they had done during the war. As the old warrior walked toward the exit, the cantina remained silent. Every listener was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest victories had come from their willingness to accept defeat rather than surrender their principles. The fifth night brought the largest crowd yet. Representatives from every major coalition species filled the cantina, with overflow crowds listening from the corridor outside. Zextal noticed several high-ranking officials recording his words, probably for military archives. The old warrior felt the weight of history in the room. He stood before the massive gathering, his 4 eyes surveying faces both familiar and new. Tonight I tell you how the war ended, he began, and why the peace we achieved terrifies me more than any battle I fought. The cantina fell into absolute silence. Even the background noise from the space station seemed to fade away. After Kepler 442, the coalition faced a terrible choice. Zextal continued. We could continue the war and eventually win through overwhelming force. Our industrial capacity far exceeded human capabilities. Our population was hundreds of times larger. Given enough time and resources, we could have destroyed every human world. Then why did you not? Called out a voice from the back. Zextal's mandibles clicked slowly. Because the cost would have destroyed us as well. Every human colony we conquered required months of siege warfare. Every human ship we destroyed took 3 or 4 coalition vessels with it. Every victory brought us closer to a Pyrrhic triumph that would leave the coalition weak and vulnerable. The veteran began walking through the crowd as he spoke. But there was another factor. Intelligence reports began reaching Coalition Command about human weapon research, projects they had been working on during the war but never deployed. What kind of weapons? The Coalition Admiral asked from his position near the wall. Biological agents that could target specific genetic markers, Zextal replied quietly. Designed to affect only non-human species? Computer viruses that could spread through our quantum communication networks and destroy entire fleet coordination systems. Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. Such weapons violated every galactic treaty on warfare. Worse than that, the old warrior continued. Humans had developed something they called planet crackers. Weapons capable of destabilizing planetary cores through artificial gravity manipulation. They could have destroyed any coalition world within range of their modified cargo ships. The cantina erupted in frightened murmurs. Planet-killing weapons were theoretical concepts that most species considered too dangerous to research. Zextal raised his damaged arm for silence. But here's what truly terrified Coalition Command. Intelligence analysis indicated that humans had possessed these weapons for months. They could have ended the war at any time by unleashing biological warfare or threatening coalition homeworlds. Why did they not use them? The tall Valyrian asked, his voice barely audible. Because they chose not to, Zextal said simply. Dr. Patricia Wells led the human research effort. When Coalition Intelligence finally intercepted her communications, they found something unexpected. He paused, letting the tension build. Dr. Wells had argued against deploying any weapon that would cause excessive civilian casualties. Even when facing extinction, even when their own worlds were under attack, humans maintained ethical restrictions on their warfare. The old warrior's voice grew quiet with something approaching awe. They fought a total war for survival while deliberately limiting themselves to weapons and tactics that would allow them to remain human afterward. That makes no sense, protested the Arthani engineer. If you possess superior weapons, you use them. That is what any rational species would do, Zextal agreed. But humans are not rational. They are principled. There is a difference. He stopped walking and faced the entire crowd. 6 months after first contact, Dr. Patricia Wells requested a ceasefire meeting. Coalition Command agreed, expecting standard surrender negotiations. What happened at the meeting? Someone called out. Zextal's 4 eyes grew distant as he remembered. Dr. Wells arrived at the neutral station alone, unarmed, wearing simple civilian clothes. She looked tired, sad, but not defeated. When she spoke to the Coalition Council, her first words changed everything. The cantina leaned forward in anticipation. She said, "Honored representatives, we are here to discuss ending this war. Not because we cannot continue fighting, but because we should not have to." Sextal's voice carried the weight of memory. Then she presented evidence of every weapon system humanity had developed but chosen not to use. She revealed their own secret weapons. The Centauri officer asked in disbelief. "All of them," Sextal confirmed. "Biological weapons, planet killers, quantum viruses, artificial intelligence systems designed to infiltrate and destroy coalition computer networks. Everything they could have used to win the war quickly." The veteran sat down heavily, his damaged arm causing visible pain. Dr. Wells explained that humans had deliberately fought with conventional weapons because they wanted to be able to respect themselves after the war ended. They would rather risk defeat than become monsters. What was the Coalition's response? "Terror," Sextal said bluntly. The Council realized they were dealing with a species that possessed weapons of mass destruction, but used them responsibly. A species that would rather die than compromise their principles. He took a sip of his drink before continuing, but Dr. Wells was not finished. "She made an offer that no one expected." "What offer?" "She proposed a permanent peace treaty with strict limitations on both sides," the old warrior explained. Humans would destroy their planet-killer weapons and biological agents in exchange for guaranteed independence. Both species would share certain technologies for mutual benefit. The Coalition agreed. The tall Valerian asked. "The Council had no choice," Sextal replied. "They were facing an enemy that could destroy Coalition civilization but chose not to. An enemy that fought honorably even when facing extinction. How do you negotiate with such opponents?" The veteran stood and walked toward the center of the room. Dr. Wells made one final statement that sealed the treaty. She looked directly at each council member and said, "We did not want this war. We did not start this conflict. But if you ever threaten Earth again, we will show you what we can do when we are not holding back." The cantina fell into shocked silence as the implications became clear. The war ended the next day. Sextal continued. Complete ceasefire, immediate withdrawal of coalition forces from human space, formal recognition of human independence. All because we finally understood what we were fighting. "What were you fighting?" the coalition admiral asked quietly. Sextal's 4 eyes swept across the crowd one final time. "We were fighting a species that treats death as an acceptable alternative to slavery. A species that develops terrible weapons but refuses to use them inappropriately. A species that would rather lose a war than win it dishonorably." He began walking toward the exit, then paused at the door. "The peace treaty is held for 3 years now. Trade relations have developed between our species. Human technology has improved coalition medical science and engineering techniques." "And the humans?" someone called out. "They continue to be humans," Sextal said with something that might have been respect. "They explore, they build, they help their neighbors. They have become valuable members of the galactic community, precisely because they refuse to be conquered by it." The old warrior looked back at the crowd of young soldiers one last time. "Remember what I have told you. Humans do not fight wars to prove their strength. They fight to preserve their right to remain human, and there is nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than someone fighting for their soul." As Sextal left the cantina, the room remained silent for long minutes. Veterans and recruits alike contemplated a species that had turned their greatest weakness, their conscience, into their most formidable weapon. The Valerian cadets, who had started this story 5 nights ago, sat quietly at their table, no longer eager for combat assignments. They had learned that some enemies are too dangerous to fight, not because of their weapons or their numbers, but because of their unwavering commitment to remaining worthy of victory. In the silence that followed, every soldier in the room understood why the Coalition maintained strict non-aggression pacts with the Terran Federation. Some lessons can only be learned through bitter experience, and the galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest victory was not winning the war. It was proving they deserved to win it.